How are you doing? Sorry. Hi, everyone. How are you doing? Okay, you're going to wait a few minutes for it to be 6 o'clock. So well, I am going to post the replay of this on YouTube. So if people miss it or log in late, you can catch the rest of it. And I'll share that on my Facebook page as well. And also in my stories. Sorry. Keep forgetting to use the microphone. So, welcome to my live. This is the third in a series of um, Instagram lives that I've been doing, talking about different aspects of my education journey. And today we're going to be talking about field trips in particular. So, I'm going to wait a few minutes for everyone to log on, or for the clock to actually strike 6 o'clock p.m. on the dot, and then I'm going to get started. So just trying to fill this dead space. So one of the things that is going on right now is it's Friday. Next week we um I got a minute left. Next week is the last week before winter break. Monday we have the last final exams. Tuesday and Wednesday we have makeup exams. And so that's kind of where my headspace has been at as far as getting things ready for the end of the quarter or 9 a week grading period. But I hope everyone has had a good week if you're in education, or I guess anything related to dealing with children or have an interest in art education. I hope you can find, some value in this and the information I'm about to give you all. And yeah. Whew. So, welcome everyone to week 3 of my series. I don't know the official name, but I guess I'll call it my education stories or my story. This week, we are talking. First of all, hi. My name is Sharon. I'm an art educator based in Montgomery, Alabama. This week, I'm excited to talk to y'all about my favorite part of teaching, or one of my favorite parts of teaching, which is field trips. And field trips are so much more than just getting out of the classroom and just having the kids do whatever. They are opportunities to inspire curiosity, build connections, and create lifelong memories for our students. And so I'm going to be sharing the process that I go through in planning meaningful and educational field trips, but also field trips that are fun. And I'm also going to talk about how you can align the field trips with your curriculum goals. In my case, since I am an art educator, it's visual art standards and overcoming. I don't know if there's common challenges, but I'll just talk about the challenges that I have faced because I have worked in 2 different school systems, in Mobile County and then now in Montgomery County public school systems. So feel free to share your questions in the comments, and I am going to answer them at the end during the Q&A if there are any questions. And then next week, I'm also going to do a video where I sum up everything I've talked about. And if anybody has any feedback, I can respond to that. Or I may just have a totally different topic that I want to discuss with y'all. So let's talk about why field trips matter so much. So in my case, or rather, I'll say they do bring learning to life. They give students to engage in a hands-on way instead of just being in the classroom. The title of this live is Field Trips as experiential learning. And so, as our administrator has said, students remember way more if they're actually practicing the skills or on a field trip and if they're filling out a worksheet in class. And so I've tried to take this to heart and show the students how the practical application of what they're learning in whatever the subject matter is, in this case, arts education, through the field trips that I plan. And I think of field trips or anything that I plan with the students as an experience overall. So it helps to, if you're planning a field trip, to think about that. So planning with a purpose, part 2. So when you're planning a field trip, the first thing I think about is the goal. What do I want students to learn? What do I want them to take away from the experience that I've created for them? And for art lessons, I want to expose them to art in the real world. There are so many museums in both Mobile and Montgomery County that the students can go to. So that's the first place that I look. And so after I get that in mind, or what the students are learning, what things that the museums have available, I look at all of those things. So once I have that goal in mind of what I want them to learn or the experience I want them to have, I pick the experience and then start trying to align my lessons with before and or after they come from the field trip to prepare them for the experience. So with me, I think because we don't have a set curriculum for arts education, meaning we don't have a curriculum pacing guide, but we do have specific standards that we need to cover in the specific level of art. And so that gives you a lot of freeness to plan, for example, in my case, I'll see what the museum has to offer and then tailor the lesson that the students are doing around that, or talk to the people at the museum to see if they have something that can connect or relate to that. And so with logistics, so then that goes to logistics, or I guess how to actually get to the place. But one thing I want to say as well is that I'm going to go back to talking about how to plan the field trips. So with me wanting to have it be a whole experience, because from my the demographic of students that I have taught is mostly Title I schools, high poverty, high percentage of free or reduced lunch, what people consider ethnic minorities, so high percentage of African American and or Hispanic students. And right now we're coming out and also failing schools. So right now we're coming out of a situation where students don't have the opportunity to go on field trips because they say you need to be in the classroom studying because you're failing. So why do you need to go on a field trip? And it got so bad that some students could go through all 4 years of high school and have never gotten the opportunity to go on a field trip. When I was in high school and middle school, we went on plenty of field trips. We didn't go on field trips all the time, but I want to say every field trip that I went on, even from preschool, I remember them vividly. And so for a student never to have had that experience is, I guess, unacceptable in my opinion. And so with that, one of the things that helps in my case is I've always had administrators and worked in systems that are very encouraging of us to plan field trips and also whatever resources that we need to have them. So in Mobile County, one of the interesting things or cool things or convenient things was that going into logistics is that they had a list of pre-approved places that we could take field trips. So for that, for example, if we wanted to go to the Mobile Museum of Art, that was pre-approved. So all we had to do was do the planning, and then the principal would sign the paper, and we didn't have to send any work to the district office to get it approved. So when I came to Montgomery, that was a little bit different. I would overhear teachers talking about they didn't want to go on field trips because they didn't want to have to do all that paperwork, quote unquote, all that paperwork. And I wondered what all that paperwork was. So it was a few years before I actually planned a field trip because it was a new school system and I was getting used to everything. But when I started actually thinking about, okay, I need to actually plan a field trip and take my students somewhere, because when I first got there, my coworker and colleague Ms. Myrick had graciously, she had already planned field trips, and so she had me along to go on a field trip with her to an art competition called Doot, DOOT. And so I got to go on at least one or two field trips with her. And then maybe a few years passed. I want to say during the pandemic, of course, no field trips. Then after the pandemic happened, I started to think, okay, I need to plan my own field trip. And so with that in mind, I started going through the process of getting the paperwork together. They had managed, our school had, um, she's not an events coordinator, but for the purpose of this, we'll say she was a teacher, but she would help activities coordinator. So she would be the person that we would turn in the paperwork to get approved to go on a field trip. And so so you had to get the paperwork. In my case, say I wanted to go to the museum. So I had to say, okay, we're going to the museum. Where are we going? What dates? Figure out a dates, or actually rather, before I even got to that step, I'm gonna just say this field trip that I planned myself. I was taking the students on a field trip to Auburn University to tour the visual arts department. So before this, a colleague and friend of mine had communicated with me that I could bring my students on a field trip to see Auburn University's Department of Arts and tour it with my students. And so I did that over the summer, and she told me that I needed to communicate with her in the spring would be better to plan it. And so I had this in mind from July to then I was getting the logistics, seeing what kind of paperwork I had to fill out, communicating with her about dates. And then when it got to be the spring, then I finally emailed her and we got all of what dates would work. And then we picked the dates, figured out how many students were going to go because I needed to know that, and the form of transportation, what time we were going to arrive. And then she sent me an itinerary of their tour. And so then I could time when we had to leave with that, because Auburn is about a 50-minute drive away from Montgomery, Alabama. And so, and hi, West Indian Queen 75. I haven't spoken to you, but thank you for joining. So with that, I got the itinerary, printed that out, and then came up with an itinerary of where what we're going to do as far as the students are. So I made a whole document with the itinerary to turn in with my field trip form. And there's an activity request form that you have to fill out. But instead of just filling out that form so that I can make sure to get my field trip approved, I would have attached all of the emails, all the communication that I'd had with the contact at Auburn University, showing the itinerary, how much it would cost, and we're going to Auburn University and the Jewel Museum, which is also in Auburn, which is an amazing museum. I don't think it's quite on the campus, but it's near Auburn University, or Auburn might own the land that it's on, but it's not on the main campus. Hi, was it lovely day 1417? So with that, so I'm talking about planning field trips. So coordinating that and going to the two places and them giving me the itinerary and the timeline and saying that it's okay. So I attached that, came up with my own itinerary, list of students, put the nice little logo on there, and then on top of that, attach the field trip form. So from the administrator's perspective, the one that I work with currently at our school, he says, I don't have a problem with approving field trips. I just want to see that everything is that basically you have a plan and you've worked everything out. And so on my end, I make sure I have all of that information beforehand before I even turn in the paperwork, so that when it's turned in, he can have exactly an idea of what exactly we're doing and how it applies. And then I will get it approved. So every field trip that I've planned so far, which has been probably about 5 now, they have been approved. So, which may not always be the case. And it's not even a lot of paperwork. It's just, you have to do your due diligence because you are taking people's children to another location. And so for me, it can be stressful trying to do all the logistics, and I like to, if I can, visit the place before I take my students, but in this case, I didn't have that opportunity. And so being familiar with someone who is going to be able to lead you through and not just show up somewhere and be totally confused is very important. So in this case, my contact at Auburn, Lauren Woods, was very gracious. The dean of the school actually gave my students a tour. They had I call them little swag bags with art supplies, and had the Auburn University logo, a sketchbook, pencil sharpener, and information about their program. So they really laid out the red carpet for us. So thank you, Auburn University Department of Art and Art History, for making the experience amazing for my students. And this is just, so this wasn't my first field trip, but this was one of the early ones, first ones I planned going out of town. I had been on a field trip in town, but that was the first, and so that was really stressful. But so, because I had literally been planning it for months, and then it did, and then the day of the field trip, it was raining. uh, it was a lot of stress, but we got there and got back. Backing up, also one of the things of planning a field trip, logistics. How are you going to get there? So in this, one of the things also that we have to plan when we're doing a field trip is, are you taking a tour bus? Are you taking a school MPS school bus? And so with that, one of the things you have to think about is, how am I going to pay for this? Because the bus driver has to be paid, and they have to pay for mileage, and also you have to pay for a substitute because you are and put in for a detached duty, basically, because you're at work but you're somewhere else. So if you have classes, somebody's going to have to cover those classes. So all you have to think about all those things as well. So that is why it's important to plan the field trip as far ahead of time as possible, so that even if you have a sub, the sub picks up, the sub gets sick, the substitute cancels because there's a conflict of interest, which I've had happen multiple times the day before I had the trip. But you can't have your field trip canceled because there was no one to cover your class, because you had already had it, booked way ahead of time. It wasn't last minute. And another thing is that they like for us to turn in the field trip form 4 to 6 weeks ahead of time, so that if you are taking a school bus, that they have time to actually schedule your bus driver. Otherwise, you would have to find someone who could actually drive a bus. In this case, because of the time we had to leave, I got a coach and teacher at the school to actually drive the bus with us, or for us. And so that did work out, but it was raining the whole way, and so that delayed us. It was kind of crazy. We left a little bit late, and we were basically an hour late getting there due to the rain, and not quite leaving on time, and me also not wanting to leave students. But at some point we had to leave students, meaning leave them at the school, as if they didn't show up when we called down for the field trip, then we just had to leave, and they were safe because they were still at school. So it wasn't like we were leaving them on the curb. But you have to think about all of these things, and also be mindful of timeliness when you are planning the field trips. So this covers tips and tricks and overcoming challenges. Another thing is that if you want to plan a field trip, try to make it, in my case, I try to make it so that the students have the least amount of financial burden when they are going on a field trip. Sometimes you can go on a field trip and this costs $15, this costs $30, they end up paying $40 for a field trip. And in this, because of the demographic of students I deal with, where some of the students may work to pay to help support their family, it's really, the only thing I want to have them cover is their food, because I know they always have food for snacks. And then if it's a student where, one or two doesn't have the funds for that, then I will gladly cover that for them. But for the most part, I'll say, okay, the bus is paid for. In this case, we have, there's a grant from the city of Montgomery, if you're going to that pays for the bus. And also Auburn University, the Jewels Museum also has a grant where they will pay for buses for, I think, Auburn City schools, but also basically any school in Alabama, I want to say, that is coming to the museum. So I think I should probably create a resource of these places and the funds that are available, so you can plan a field trip that's cost effective. So in this case, they didn't have to pay anything for the bus because that was covered by art fee, or money in the art fee account that we had previously. And then I didn't charge anything for the students they didn't have to pay to enter the museum. And then Auburn, of course, is a complimentary. It was basically a college tour. And so the only thing that I told the students that they had to pay for was their food, because we were out of town. And so they were able to do that. They got away, and they were gone all day, and we got back right as school was letting out. And so again, we got back a little later than planned, but everything worked out and the students had an amazing time. So I think that's pretty much, that's not everything, but that's everything that we went over. So as far as me planning a trip. So the first thing, you want to see where you're going. What do you want the students to learn? In my case, I want it to be an experience. I want them to see the practical application of art, or in this case, my plan recently has been to go on as many tours of college fine arts departments as possible. So far, I've gone to Auburn University last year, which was amazing. Then this year again, we went, not again, but this year I did a trip to the University of Alabama Department of Art and Art History in the Tully Body Fine Arts Building, which is actually not far from downtown Montgomery. And so that was a close by field trip, but the tour lasted a good while. And so one of the things that I do that is intentional is if I'm putting all of this planning into students being planning the field trip and students being away from campus, I try to have us gone as long as possible to make it worth it. And so it's a whole experience for the students. In the field trip, when we went to the Alabama State Department of Art and Art History, goodness gracious, stop texting me. It was amazing because it was mostly juniors and seniors, and they got to dress out. So I allowed them to dress out so they could be comfortable. They got a tour of all the different departments, and I was very flexible about them walking around and looking at things. But then we got to eat in the cafeteria on campus, and that the students really enjoyed that because they kind of got their lunch experience at school is not great at all. And so they got to see how they had the freedom to walk around to get the buffet. It was $10 all you can eat. They had sent us an invoice beforehand, kind of so the students can know how much to expect. That's another thing I worked out with the planning. And so thank you, Meredith Knight, who is the interim chair of the department, Nathaniel Allen, Cleve Weber, and let's see, I would thank Christopher Greenman as well because we did tour his exhibit even though he was not there, but we got to see his beautiful work. So those three people or four people. Also Alana Taylor. So we got to tour her class. So all of the professors were really gracious in letting us come into their classes. And so the students just got to see like how relaxed and welcoming and just see a totally different environment in a beautiful building at a historically Black college and university that is right down the street from them, probably less than a mile or two from where they live. And then they got to come back to school and go about their day. And they didn't know. All they had to pay for was their food in this case. And so I think that depending on what you want your students to learn, I think it's for me, the purpose is to have the students have a really positive experience. For other people, it may be different, but I plan it with, okay, how can they just not be so rushed? Like we're going here, we're going here, we're going there. Okay, we don't have time to see this. They really have time to chill, have fun conversations, experience this place with their friends and classmates, and really just get away from the school environment. Because even though I want them to have an appreciation of art, it's also the experience of not being so stifled and have the openness and the freedom to just be and be present and enjoy a new place. So those are all of my, not all of them, but most of the tips and trips that I had, tips and tricks of planning field trips. Bonjour, Francois. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, but I'm going to, I don't know. Sorry, I'm getting off track, but we talked about why field trips matter, how to plan them effectively. Hi, Nicole. How to overcome challenges, how to make good experiences for your students. I could talk about more things in depth, but and create a resource if you want me to comment or create a resource that has places in Montgomery and museums and things that are good places to go, because I have plans for other experiences for my students where they can attend. I have plans to attend the Alabama Shakespeare Festival in the spring with my art students, because I have a plan to go to Freedom Quilting Bee in Boykin, Alabama, or G's Bend, Alabama, with my fashion club students. So that's currently in process. So I have to figure out how to get funds for that because that is a distance away. And so I have, and one more thing I want to add is that students and my students, they want to go on field trips. I have literally had students who are not in my class come to me and say, I want to go, oh, like, like the field trip form was almost like contraband that like, hey, I have this field trip form. Can I go on the field trip? I'm like, where did you get this from? So if a student comes to me and they want to go on a field trip and they're a decent student and they behave, then, and I don't have a problem, letting them go and having the experience, especially if it's a college tour or something that's relevant to their interest, but I don't actually teach them because I have had that happen. I've had students hear about a field trip from their friends and email me and like really nice formally and say, hey, I'm interested in going to the school. Can I tag along on this field trip? And so in that case, I have, like I said, how can I say no as long as you, so here's a field trip form. If you fit the quota. One time I had, students, I was taking my class and I booked for a certain amount of students and I had a good number of space left. And so since I had enough to accommodate other students, then I opened it up to other students so I can meet the quota, because ultimately I want students who are actually interested in the experience to go on the field trip. I'm not going to drag you somewhere that you don't want to go. You know, you can't force someone to go on a field trip. So bye. So that is, one thing that I found about that. So, I love to hear y'all's feedback about or questions about planning field trips. If you're nervous about planning a field trip and want tips about that, how to go about that. If you're in Montgomery specifically and you're a public school teacher and want to know how to go about planning a field trip or putting together or filling out the activity request form, getting a bus, all those things, I'm more than happy to help you with and give you my resources. So thank you all for joining me today. Next week, we're going to do a recap of all of the things I've talked about before, maybe a Q&A, and I can also maybe go, if you want me to go more in depth about certain points that I talked about in my previous Instagram lives, then I can do that. So I am Sharon, an educator in Montgomery, Alabama. I am Sharon82 on Instagram and also on YouTube, where you can watch the replays of the previous episodes. And then either later this evening or Saturday morning, I will have the replay of this posted, so you can watch this at your leisure, because I actually don't like how you can't have the window picture in picture when you're replaying an Instagram video. And so for your convenience, I will have that open to you. Oh, also, please check out my Instagram post, follow, subscribe. I am going to be speaking at a creative placemaking communities conference in April, talking about how to make your high school a creative safe space. And so this is kind of good practice that's another way to create the creative placemaking safe space, is creating the school is a place where students can come and know that if they come here, it can be the launching off point for them to have field trips, because field trips are actually an extension of the school environment. And so with that, I hope everybody has a good Saturday, or rather a good Friday evening, has a good weekend, and I will see you guys next Friday at 6 p.m. hopefully. Thank you for joining. Have a good evening. Bye. Peace.